Joining me live from Brisbane is the Employment and Workplace Relations Minister, Murray Watt, up early after a long night. Murray Watt, thanks for your patience. I saw you waiting there. Can I get your reaction first to this Queensland result? Not a great result for Labor, I have to say.
Well, I think, Andrew, when you consider where all the projections were even just a few weeks ago, this is a much better than expected result for Queensland Labor last night. It does look likely that David Crisafulli and the LNP will have a narrow majority, but the number of seats that Labor looks like gaining and retaining is far higher than what people thought was possible even just a few weeks ago. So, you know, of course, we would have preferred to win. You always prefer to win an election, but if we were going to lose, at least there's a very healthy opposition numbers, and some of our most important people have retained their seats for the future as well. So we'll go away and have a look at this and look at what lessons there are. But I think Stephen Miles, the State Secretary, Katie Flanders, and the entire team have done a remarkable job to bring back Labor from where we were a few months ago.
All right, it's nice to hear you concede David Crisafulli will have a majority, because Stephen Miles did not. And indeed, in my view, he was ungracious not conceding last night. Do you encourage him to concede to David Crisafulli today, and what do you make of his speech?
Oh, I actually thought Stephen's speech was terrific. I thought he talked about the great effort from Labor and its volunteers, acknowledged what Queenslanders had to say through their voting patterns. I think, to be fair to Stephen, at the time that he gave that speech last night, the result was pretty unclear. The LNP hadn't reached a majority at that point in time, so I thought that his comments were valid. I'm sure that Stephen will have more to say about that at some point, whether it be today or tomorrow. But, you know, we'll wait and see how the final results pan out, but that's the way things are looking at the moment.
How much do you think I don't agree, by the way. I have to say, I think it was pretty clear that Crisafulli was winning at least. Even if it wasn't going to be a majority, there was no way Labor could form government. So do you think he'll reflect on that and think, look, I should have been... there was no congratulations or anything to Crisafulli. Very unusual speech. Shouldn't he have at least done that?
Well, my recollection from what Stephen said was that he acknowledged that Labor wouldn't be able to form a majority. At the point in time that he gave that speech last night, we hadn't seen the LNP get to a majority, I think, on any of the television broadcasts. So I think it was fair enough for Stephen to say that at that point in time. I'm sure that he'll have another look at the results this morning and see how things are panning out. But as I say, overall, for Labor to record the number of seats that we did was a pretty amazing result. And I think there's some really clear messages in this for people like Peter Dutton and, of course, the Greens, who had a terrible night here in Queensland on the back of very poor performances in the ACT as well.
How much do you think the abortion issue played into the result?
I think it was a very contributing factor, Andrew. I mean, there were a range of issues at play here. Of course, cost of living, I think, was still the dominant issue, and the fact that Stephen and his team put on the table things like the 50-cent fares really cut through on that cost of living issue. But certainly through the campaign, I think the confusion and uncertainty around the LNP's position on abortion really cut through, particularly with women and also with younger voters. I saw it for myself when I was on pre-poll booths around the state where women of all ages, young, middle-aged, older women, were coming straight to Labor talking about the abortion issue being a driving factor in their vote. And I think it was partly the issue itself. People in this day and age were horrified to think that a government might be looking at recriminalising abortion. But it was also the way that David Crisafulli handled the issue. I think it was about 150 questions he had on the issue, and he refused to give an answer. It fed into the idea that he was evasive and shifty, and people really felt a lack of trust there. And as I say, I think that's one of the key messages. Can I just say, I think that's one of the key messages for Peter Dutton federally, is that I think voters have shown that they expect clear answers to questions. Vague plans are not a substitute for concrete policies. So Peter Dutton, I think, is going to come under more pressure to give answers to things like the cost of his nuclear power plan, what tax cuts he's going to provide, if it's going to high-income earners, is that going to involve cuts to Medicare clinics or other services? Peter Dutton can't just expect to arrogantly get through this campaign without answering questions. He's got to front up and explain to people what his plans are.
Will you seek to exploit the abortion issue at the federal election, given the comments of Jacinta Price and Barnaby Joyce?
Well, I am very concerned, as someone who is pro-choice myself, to see senior members of the federal coalition reopening this debate on the national stage. You've got two senior members, both in the shadow cabinet, saying that this is an issue, or in Jacinta Price's case, saying that this is an issue that should be considered on the national stage. Barnaby Joyce backing her in. There's a bill that's been introduced to the Senate at the moment by Matt Canavan concerning these issues as well. So I think it is concerning that there are a number of senior nationals in particular who want to reopen this debate. I think one of the issues here in Queensland was that people were shocked that this is an issue that is still up for debate. I understand that people have got different views on this. We've always supported a conscience vote on these matters in the Labor Party. But I think most Australians regard this as an issue that has been settled now. And Queenslanders were shocked to even see that there were members of the LNP who were making comments saying they wanted to reopen that debate. We're now seeing it at the federal level as well, and I think that's a great concern.
Peter Dutton is going to say this is settled, it's not a federal issue, and the LNP is saying you're trying to Americanise Australian politics. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not the Labor Party who are wanting to reopen this debate. We've got a settled position. The laws have been passed here in Queensland, as they have pretty much across the country. The only people I see wanting to relitigate whether abortion should be a crime or not are members of the LNP, both here in Queensland and now on the national stage. If Peter Dutton is that concerned about this issue, maybe he could have a word to some of his senior shadow ministers who keep wanting to reopen this debate. I saw Peter Dutton and a range of his colleagues try to shut down the debate quickly. That's exactly what David Crisafulli did here by saying it wasn't an issue, people didn't care about it. Well, what we saw on the weekend is that people do care about these things.
Are you worried by how emphatic this defeat is? I mean, it is 54-46, regardless of what the seats are. That is emphatic. And it comes after one of the biggest cost of living bunch of gimmies that we've seen from a government, particularly in an inflationary environment. So what does this mean federally? Does it mean that you're in a bit of trouble?
Look, we always acknowledge that Queensland is a tough state for Labor federally, and the record shows that. But I actually take great hope from the results last night here in Queensland. The results have played out differently in different parts of the state. Our vote hasn't gone too far backwards in the seats around Cairns, which is the federal seat of Leichhardt. Even some of the regional seats that we appear to have lost have been where we've had incumbent members retiring, so it's not surprising to see the result go back there. But I think importantly, it gives us a great amount of hope when it comes to some of the Brisbane-based seats that are currently held by the Greens. As I said, I think last night was a terrible result for the Greens, and it gives us real hope that we can reclaim the seat of Griffith and potentially gain the seats of Brisbane and Ryan as well, if you look at those state results. And I think, what was really coming through from voters in those seats that are currently held by the Greens federally is a real sense of buyer's remorse. People voted for the Greens, both at state and federal level, expecting to see progressive solutions delivered, and all they've ended up getting is a bunch of blockers and extreme activists who seem increasingly out of touch with what voters in those areas think. We've had a lot of feedback that people really noticed Max Chandler-Mather on stage with the CFMEU, pursuing an extreme sort of agenda there. They're obviously trying to whip up anger and anxiety in the community over Palestine and constantly blocking Labor when we're trying to deliver progressive reform on things like housing and even creating an environmental protection agency. I think people are starting to see through the Greens here in Queensland, yeah.
If we have a March budget, Murray Watt, will it be full of gimmies like Stephen Miles produced on the cost of living front?
We're obviously sort of working through our mid-year financial review at the moment, Andrew, so I'm not sure how much work has gone into preparing a budget for next year. We'll be getting through the current mid-year review process first, but clearly the Albanese government has already delivered a substantial amount of cost of living relief, whether it be the tax cuts, the cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, energy bill relief. We will continue to do everything we possibly can to deliver cost of living relief to Australians. We know it's the biggest issue people are concerned about at the moment, but of course we'll do that at the same time as bringing down inflation and continuing to create jobs in a record way like we have been so far.
I wanted to ask about these Israeli strikes on Iran. What could happen in this war from here?
Yeah, look, this is obviously another concerning development in what has become a very long-running conflict, Andrew. As we've said before, we recognise Israel's right to defend itself. We recognise that all nations, including Israel, have a right to defend themselves in line with international law. More broadly, of course, what we're working with like-minded countries around the world is to try to have a ceasefire across the Middle East. We don't want to see an increasing number of civilians lose their lives, like we've seen in Gaza and to some degree in Lebanon as well. But I think every escalation is a concerning development.
In your portfolio, Angus Taylor gave a speech at the HR Nichols Society during the week where he said there would be a serious winding back of Labor's IR laws if the coalition was elected. But we've had a crisis in productivity in this country for quite some time. Has that been helped by your multi-employer bargaining laws and your right to disconnect laws and your changes to laws around casuals?
No, I don't think it has, Andrew. And in terms of the first part, again, I was really concerned to see another senior member of the opposition flag an intention to wind back the changes that Labor has made to workplace laws, which are actually delivering the higher wages that Australians desperately need right now. You know, we are in the middle of some really serious cost of living pressures, and one of the key ways of dealing with that is making sure that people's wages are rising. We've seen that happen as a result of our laws. We continue to create more jobs, so it's not crashing the economy or crashing jobs. And in terms of things like multi-employer bargaining, there's no evidence whatsoever that that's contributed to economic harm or lower productivity. The reality is that the decade that the Coalition were in power was the worst decade in about 60 years for Australia when it came to productivity growth. So we are coming off a low base. It is growing, albeit at a very small amount. And what Labor wants to do to lift productivity is things like improve our skills, invest in skills and training, invest in infrastructure, cheaper and cleaner energy. All the LNP have ever got is cutting wages and conditions. Every senior minister seems to be now intent on doing that by saying they're going to scrap a range of rights. And I think right now is the worst possible time you could be looking at cutting people's wages and conditions when they're already struggling to stay afloat.
Just finally, there have been these revelations in a book by the journalist Joe Aston that, well, he says Anthony Albanese got something like 22 free upgrades from Qantas. He claims the PM asked Alan Joyce for Chairman's Lounge membership for his son. Do you think these stories hurt the PM?
Well, as you know, Andrew, these stories have been in print before and the Prime Minister's dealt with them at the time. What I can assure you viewers is that at all times, Labor has had the national interest at the front of our attention when it comes to our decisions about aviation policy. So I've really got nothing to add to what the Prime Minister said before.
Murray Watt, thanks so much for your time.